All right, so what about Trump? He basically hit Iran where it hurts. Now, the situation in the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East has completely reversed overnight. What happened? What caused this outcome? In addition, Trump not only fell out with the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, but also harshly criticized Italian Prime Minister Meloni. Trump has also fallen out with Europe, including the European countries of NATO, and it seems he's almost on a path of no return. In addition, Trump issued a clear warning to Xi Jinping. How did Xi Jinping respond? Xi's response is actually quite interesting. Haha. Today, this is the topic that Fang Wei is bringing to you. Today's topics are all very significant and fascinating, so everyone must watch until the end. The current global situation is like a chess game played by Trump. Everything is unpredictable, and each of us is a spectator and observer of the game. Let's see how Trump handles such a complex situation in the Middle East and what the final outcome will be. Let me make a prediction first. I think the situation in the Middle East will ultimately be resolved in a very clean and decisive way, something that hasn't been achieved in over 100 years. Such a complex Middle Eastern issue may actually be solved, and once it is, there is no doubt that the world's focus will shift to East Asia. Let's just sit back and watch this global chess game unfold. All right, welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Fang Wei. Hello to our YouTube viewers and to all the listeners of Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. All right, let's start by talking about the current situation. So overnight, the situation has completely reversed. What does that mean? First, let me share an announcement with everyone. The announcement comes from General Brad Cooper, the commander of the United States Central Command. He said that as the US military maintains maritime superiority in the Middle East, a full blockade of Iranian ports has now been implemented. 90% of Iran's economy relies on international maritime trade. Within less than 36 hours of enforcing the blockade, the US military has completely halted all maritime economic trade entering and leaving Iran. All right, that's what he said. In addition, the Central Command also issued another statement saying that an F-35B stealth fighter jet is ready to take off from the amphibious assault ship USS America. What is the USS America? It's actually a task force of the US Marine Corps, and to be honest, it's basically an aircraft carrier, a small aircraft carrier. They call it an amphibious assault ship, and it's mainly equipped with helicopters and attack helicopters. So, to put it simply, it's also an aircraft carrier, just one that belongs to the Marine Corps. So, what about this one called the USS Tripoli? It's currently carrying out a mission in the Arabian Sea. The Arabian Sea is basically the sea outside the Strait of Hormuz. According to the Central Command, the USS Tripoli and its 3,500 sailors and embarked Marines are carrying out a mission to blockade ships entering and leaving Iranian ports. Okay, what does this mean? It means that Iran, which wanted to use the Strait of Hormuz to choke the world, is now being choked in return by Trump, so much so that it can barely breathe. How should I put it? It's like this. First of all, there are four things. The first thing is that Iran suddenly finds itself facing a comprehensive oil and trade embargo. The US counter-blockade basically starts from the Strait of Hormuz. Any ship that docks at an Iranian port or along the Iranian coastline, or even ships that have paid Iran for passage, are all turned back and not allowed to leave. So, the US counter-blockade has caused Iran's economy and trade to come to a complete halt, with daily losses exceeding $400 million, about $430 million per day, which adds up to $13 billion in a month. So, Iran lost all its foreign exchange and even foreign aid overnight. Why do I say even foreign aid is gone? Because this $13 billion is currently the only income the Iranian government has. Even the military salaries depend on this. Maintaining the Revolutionary Guard also relies on this. As for foreign military aid from the Chinese Communist Party, that too depends on oil exchanges. Why would the CCP provide so much missile fuel or secretly sell them shoulder-fired missiles if not for oil? Why would they give them things like ballistic missiles? It's all because of oil exchanges. Now, Iran is empty-handed and can't export a single drop of oil. Would the CCP still provide them with anything? In that case, not only would they be offending the United States, but it would also be like throwing meat buns to a dog. Once it's gone, it never comes back. The second thing is that Iran's entire oil storage capacity can only hold 2 weeks' worth of oil. After 2 weeks, all the tanks will be full, and the entire Iranian oil industry will be facing a shutdown. I mentioned this to everyone yesterday. This involves 1 million oil workers. Workers related to the oil industry, along with several million of their family members, would immediately be faced with a situation where they have no means of livelihood. Thirdly, and this is quite interesting, although the United States doesn't have many minesweepers, it does have unmanned underwater mine clearing equipment. The US mine clearing devices have been operating in the Gulf for nearly 4 days. Not a single naval mine has been found. So, does that mean Iran's naval mines are just for show? That's very likely. As everyone knows, Iran claims that the Strait of Hormuz is filled with naval mines. This is what Iran itself says, though it hasn't been verified. After Iran announced the blockade and mined the strait, the United States sank all of Iran's mine-laying ships. So, is it possible that Iran actually didn't lay any mines at all? Do you think that's possible? I actually think it's quite possible, don't you? Because if the Strait of Hormuz were really filled with mines, how would Iran's own ships get out? It's very likely that they were just bluffing, using tough talk as a psychological tactic. They didn't actually lay mines, and when they really wanted to, the US came in and destroyed all their mine-laying ships. So even if they wanted to lay mines, they couldn't anymore. In addition, US warships have already entered the strait. This started last Saturday. Iran's coastal missiles and drones, all 111 of them, didn't dare to launch. So Iran. So, is Iran's naval show of force also just for show? I have some followers on X who told me, after all this fuss, Iran is just all talk. It's using words to blockade the strait, not actual mines. So, is that really the case? It's very possible, really very possible that this is the case because you see these ship owners are just too scared to make a move. So right now, in the Persian Gulf, there are 3,200 ships stuck there. Most of them are cruise ships, and many others are cargo ships. None of them dare to move simply because they're afraid of being attacked or even sunk. So, after all this, are Iran's threats just for show? But the US blockade is for real. Right now, in the Gulf of Oman outside the Strait of Hormuz, there are 12 American warships and 10,000 Navy and Marine personnel lined up forming a blockade. In the 24 hours before the strait was blocked, the US forced back 6 ships related to Iran. At the same time, they allowed 20 ships unrelated to Iran to pass through. Alright, so what was the result? Some people said, well, the Chinese Communist Party's media reported, according to so-called sources, but actually that's not true. Online rumors claimed that 4 Chinese super cruise ships successfully passed through the Strait of Hormuz, ignoring the US military blockade. They also hyped up the story, saying that the CCP's Daking ship, the Daking warship, was involved. So, it was said to have appeared and escorted the Chinese Silk Road ship out, but what was the truth? It was fake news. In reality, did these 4 ships exist? Yes, they did, but all 4 of them went to Saudi Arabia and Iraq to load oil. And the docking ship was completely more than 500 nautical miles away, so these 4 ships were not blocked by the United States at all. They were not among those that were blocked. They did not dock at Iranian ports and had nothing to do with Iran. That's the first point. Second, the docking ship was outside the 500 nautical mile international waters, so it had absolutely nothing to do with this incident. It was just the CCP spreading propaganda. And then, what did we talk about yesterday? Something like the Haxing ship, right? Or was it called the Fuchsing ship? The Fuchsing ship has already turned back the way it came and can't get out. This is the real situation at the moment, right? Alright, so what's next? The next step is that US warships will begin regular escort missions, meaning that when cruise ships go in and out, warships will be escorting them nearby. Since there are no naval mines in the water, if Iran launches missiles, unmanned ships or drones, as soon as they fire, they will definitely face immediate retaliation. So launching an attack would be almost like committing suicide. That's the situation, so it seems the strait has been opened up just like that. Let's keep watching. So, the United States basically wants to blockade the Strait of Hormuz to choke the whole world. But now, Iran has been caught by the throat by Trump in return, making it hard for them to breathe first. So, what will Iran do next? Recently, Iran has issued a warning, and they have their own so-called A major general from the Revolutionary Guard named Major General Abdul Rassi said that if the United States continues the blockade, the Iranian military will not allow any passage through the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, or any entry or exit points to the Red Sea. In other words, Iran will use missiles to blockade the Red Sea and the southern Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Will he do it? Will he really choke off that throat? If you ask me, I think it's very likely that he wouldn't dare. Why? Because over there, Iran does have its little brother, the Houthi forces, but when the war started, the Houthis didn't dare make a move for almost a whole month. In the end, the only action they took was to fire 2 missiles at Israel. Just 2, both of which were intercepted by Israel. After that, there wasn't a third missile. What does this mean? It means the Houthi forces are extremely cautious and don't simply follow their master's orders. Because if they really dared to blockade the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, it would be like throwing an egg against a rock, right? That would only invite a powerful strike from the United States. To their north is Saudi Arabia, which wants to wipe them out. To their east is the official Yemeni government, which also wants to destroy them. If the US joins in for a 3-pronged attack, then they wouldn't even be able to protect themselves. So the Houthis have to think about their own survival before they can save their master. That's why up to now, their actions can be described as too late and too little. They acted very late and did very little. So they may not necessarily risk their lives for Iran. Of course, even if they do, it would just be sending themselves straight into the line of fire. The US would naturally deal with it in the same way, which is to address the issue of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the southern exit of the Red Sea. Now, that's one aspect. The second aspect is this. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is currently working through Gulf countries to obtain and freeze the bank accounts of Iranian regime officials in these countries because these Iranian officials have opened many bank accounts in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and so on. You open so many accounts in those places, keep your money in their countries, and then you launch missiles at their civilian facilities. What do you expect as a result? Now, they're just handing over these accounts to the US government. Trump, yes, and Besant even directly contacted China. He said, "We are reaching out to various banks, including the Bank of China, to remind them that any transactions related to Iranian goods are prohibited. If US dollars are used, they will face sanctions. If any issues arise, we will impose secondary sanctions." What does that mean? So this Besant is asking the Chinese Communist Party for accounts, and also asking the Gulf countries for accounts. Why would they give them? Why do they have to give them? Of course, first of all, the Gulf countries are quite willing to provide them. But let's say they aren't willing, or the Chinese Communist Party isn't willing. Then what? It's very simple. I'll just sanction you. You take the blame for these Iranian officials, then we'll come after you. That's the situation. So now, as you can see, both at sea and online, I'm talking about online, there's a dual crackdown on Iran. So let me give my take on this. As the saying goes, an air battle is not as effective as a naval battle, and attacking a city is not as effective as besieging it. Trump's most important advisor, Stephen Miller, said yesterday in a video interview on television, "Whoever controls the seas controls the discourse. America's powerful navy is what enables the United States to win any conflict with any other country." What does that mean? What he means is that if the US Navy is strong enough to blockade shipping routes, then no country would be able to export anything. The entire flow of trade would be cut off. So no country can stand up to the United States. The US can completely cut off your supply lines. To put it plainly, this is what we're talking about. Trump's actions with Iran were essentially about cutting off supply routes, weren't they? Let me explain to everyone what it means to cut off supply routes. In military confrontations, cutting off supply lines is actually an extremely effective tactic. Why do we say this? Because it's said that crippling someone's hands and feet is not as effective as cutting off their supply lines. Take, for example, the Battle of Guandu between Cao Cao and Yuan Shao, the Battle of Changping between Qin and Zhao, the Battle of Fei River during the Eastern Jin, the Battle of Cannae in the Roman Empire, and even Rommel's North African campaign in World War II. All of these were won by cutting off the enemy's supply lines. So, if the supply lines are cut off, the air raid campaign turns into a siege, into a city encirclement. How much longer can Iran hold out? This is the problem we're facing right now. Alright, so here's the situation now. Currently, almost all of the world's 7 major maritime choke points are under the control of the United States. One of them is the Strait of Malacca. I haven't shared this news with everyone yet. Trump, Hegseth specifically went to Indonesia to sign an agreement with the Indonesian government regarding the Strait of Malacca. It's a defense agreement for the strait. Essentially, the Strait of Malacca accounts for 90% of global shipping passing through that strait. The Malacca Strait and the Panama Canal have already been secured. The Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Suez Canal, as well as the Turkish Straits and the Danish Straits. Among these, the first 5 can basically be said to be under the control or surveillance of the United States. So if the United States were to impose a maritime blockade on any country, for example, a country like Iran or like Venezuela in the past, or even the Chinese Communist Party in the future, it would result in a complete cut-off of trade and commerce. Okay, so Stephen Miller said, this is the general idea, not his exact words, that Iran must either accept an agreement without nuclear weapons or accept being boxed in, as he put it, meaning being completely cut off from trade and commerce. However poor you want to make yourself, that's up to you. Then he went on to say that Trump is now leading America back on track, which will lay the foundation for the United States to maintain a dominant position in the world for the next 100 years. So what about Iran? Not to mention that starting yesterday, the entire economic and trade sector, yesterday it was already reported that the military actions by the US and Israel have caused losses amounting to $270 billion, 270 billion US dollars. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies in the US, which is a think tank, has made a preliminary estimate that the losses are between 150 billion and 300 billion US dollars. In short, Iran's economy has already collapsed and it's been completely strangled. It can't even breathe. So what can it do? So, moving forward, this is how overnight the situation has been turned around. Originally, it was Iran choking the world's neck, but now Trump has Iran by the throat. Will Iran agree to negotiations? So, Trump said that whatever happens in the next 2 days will be very interesting. Alright, let me digress a bit and talk about some related news because it involves some knowledge. Top nuclear physicists in the United States are now expressing appreciation for Trump's team's negotiations in Pakistan. How should I put it? A physicist named David Albright, who is the director of the Institute for Science and International Security in Washington, D.C., praised Vice President Pence's decision to walk out midway during the negotiations in Pakistan. He said that the United States' decision to walk out in Islamabad was the right one. The action taken by the American negotiation team clearly showed that they were not negotiating just for the sake of negotiating. By walking out, they put Iran in a passive position and made it clear that Iran is on the losing side in this conflict. The core disagreement between the two sides in these negotiations is, of course, that Iran insists on continuing uranium enrichment, and uranium enrichment is precisely the key step in producing nuclear weapons. A physicist named Albright said that the nuclear agreement should be written as follows. It should call for zero enrichment, zero highly enriched uranium, and just depleted enrichment. Then it should specify the stockpiles of highly enriched uranium and low enriched uranium. This must be accompanied by comprehensive inspections by nuclear inspectors. And they must provide a complete nuclear declaration, which Iran has never done. Even after signing so many agreements with Obama in 2015, they have never provided a complete nuclear declaration detailing exactly what they have achieved. In addition, the deputy director of the Non-Proliferation Program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in the United States is named Stricker, and he also said that choosing to walk away was a wise decision. Allowing Iran to retain its stockpile of enriched uranium and its enrichment capabilities essentially means preserving the means for them to manufacture nuclear weapons. So he said that a good agreement must require the Iranian regime not only to hand over its nuclear fuel and dismantle key facilities, but also to permanently ban uranium enrichment activities. In addition, Iran must fully cooperate with thorough investigations by the International Atomic Energy Agency. This process may take several years. However, the International Atomic Energy Agency has already carried out this kind of nuclear weapons dismantlement inspection in Iraq, Libya, and South Africa. We have experience in successfully accomplishing this task. In addition, a Middle Eastern official has already confirmed to Fox News that the United States made concessions in the past 2 days, allowing Iran to not be able to develop nuclear energy for 20 years. But even this was rejected by Iran. So, in the end, it may still come down to being forced to drink the penalty cup after refusing the toast. Alright, next, I want to briefly talk about how Trump and Obama had completely different strategies toward Iran. In 2015, Obama signed an agreement with Iran called the Iran Nuclear Deal, also known as the JCPOA. What does that mean? What is the essence of this nuclear deal? It's essentially about imposing certain restrictions. And in exchange, this would ease tensions between Iran and the international community. There are restrictions like you really can't enrich uranium to 90%. It can only be limited to below 4%. It seems like that's enough, right? But where's the problem? The problem is that there's no way to inspect. If they violate the agreement, they just sign their name and then break the rules. Before you can inspect them, you have to notify them in advance. That's exactly how this agreement was signed. It's like telling a thief before you catch him, "Hey thief, I'm coming to catch you. Get ready so I don't actually catch you," right? That's the biggest loophole. The second loophole is that it doesn't mention ballistic missiles at all. There are no restrictions on ballistic missiles. So what does Iran do? Their plan is to produce tens of thousands of ballistic missiles as a so-called shield or cover for manufacturing nuclear weapons. In other words, Iran uses nuclear weapons as a shield for the Mullah regime to threaten the Middle East and the world. And then it uses a large number of ballistic missiles. What are ballistic missiles? They're missiles that can strike the other side, right? To serve as a shield for its nuclear weapons, using them as a shield for its nuclear program. President Obama, just for a verbal promise from the other side or for a signature, lifted the sanctions. So what was the exchange? Since you agreed and signed this agreement, the sanctions on Iran's oil were lifted, the financial sanctions on Iran were lifted, and over $10 billion in funds were unfrozen. Why did the Obama administration in 2016 gather up all the cash from banks in DC and the surrounding Virginia area, and then use C-17 military helicopters, military transport planes, to deliver pallets of cash, $400 million in cash to Iran? They shipped it to Iran. Of course, the Obama administration would say this was because before 1979, Iran had purchased military equipment from the United States. Later, after the Islamic Revolution, the US didn't deliver the goods, so they needed to refund the payment from back then. But why should the Mullah regime in Iran inherit the debts of the Pahlavi dynasty? What does this mean? It's completely unnecessary. In fact, the point is to show goodwill. See, I'm finding reasons to give you benefits. You want to use force, but I'm being so nice to you. Can't you just not threaten the world? That's what this means. But the problem is, does Iran get to decide? You show goodwill, they agree, they sign, they make promises. But do those promises count? They're just like the Chinese Communist Party. Their words don't count. All promises, whether from the communist regime or this Iranian so-called cult regime, are just expedient measures. So, to put it simply, the essence of the Obama administration's approach was to try to buy you off. Look, I'm being so nice to you, so you should behave a little better too. That's basically what it means. Now, I want to ask our audience, does buying off an evil regime actually work? As for Trump, his approach was completely the opposite. Trump had a completely different strategy. Trump used maximum pressure. Whether you liked it or not, you had to fully accept his terms. So Trump was absolutely unyielding in his approach, totally different from Obama. Which direction do you agree with? Do you agree with Trump or with Obama? Let's do a poll, shall we? These are indeed two completely different approaches from two presidents, yet both are from the United States. All right, now let me talk about this current situation. Let me talk about Trump. He really is absolutely blunt. He criticized Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, who is considered a political ally of Trump. But before I get into that, let me mention something I haven't talked about in the past couple of days, the conflict between Trump and the Pope. In early April, Pope Leo XIV said that Trump's threat to wipe out Iran and his rhetoric about destroying an entire civilization was truly unacceptable. This is not only a matter of international law, but also a moral issue. He then said that he would continue to speak out loudly against war. Trump was very angry when he saw this. On April 12th, Trump posted a strong rebuttal on social media, saying that Pope Leo was weak on fighting crime. He also said that Leo's foreign policy was terrible and that he should focus on being a great pope instead of getting involved in politics. Trump said, "I don't want a pope who thinks Iran can have nuclear weapons. He criticizes the president of the United States just because I was overwhelmingly elected by the voters to do exactly what I'm doing." He then criticized the pope for pandering to the far-left forces. So how did the Pope respond? On April 13th, he replied saying, "I am not afraid of the Trump administration, and I will continue to loudly proclaim the message of the gospel and the faith. As disciples of Christ, we will always stand on the side of peace." There is indeed a question here. Is peace always absolutely right? I will discuss this issue with everyone in a moment. As a result, Trump immediately responded, saying, "Has anyone told the Pope that Iran has killed 42,000 square meters in the past 2 months? And they also possess nuclear weapons. Is this acceptable? Has anyone told the Pope this?" Well, there really is an issue here, which is about teaching peace and opposing war. In this world, there are pacifists who say, as long as we have peace, peace is justice, and war is evil. Is this statement correct? I want to ask everyone this question. All right, so can we do a quick poll? What does everyone think about this? Okay, let's talk about it next. As a result, the Italian Prime Minister, Meloni, who is a good friend of Trump, made a statement criticizing Trump regarding Pope Leo XIV's remarks. She said that Trump's criticism of the Pope is unacceptable. Then Trump immediately fired back, saying that the one whose stance is unacceptable is actually Meloni. Afterwards, Italy's Corriere della Sera interviewed Trump by phone, and Trump said that Meloni's position is unacceptable. He said he was shocked by her attitude. He also said that the Pope has no idea what's happening in Iran and doesn't understand the current stakes involved. Meloni hasn't given us any help at all, and I'm shocked by her. He said that on one hand, Meloni relies on Washington, but on the other hand, she refuses to take action. Of course, after this round of exchanges, neither the White House nor the Italian Prime Minister's office responded further. So why is Meloni doing this? If you ask me, this is Fang Wei's commentary. What follows is my own commentary, because Meloni hasn't explained why she's doing this. My take is that due to domestic political pressure, she has no choice but to distance herself from Trump and from Israel. In addition to that, she also took another action. Yesterday, Meloni issued another statement saying that, given the current situation, the government has decided to suspend the automatic renewal of the defense agreement with Israel. In other words, they will not be renewing the defense agreement with Israel. So how did Israel respond? They didn't get angry. Instead, they downplayed the impact of this decision, saying that the agreement was basically symbolic and didn't involve anything substantial and so on. So, in essence, you're just not renewing an agreement that didn't really do much anyway. That's the situation. Well, so this is the current situation between both sides. Of course, as everyone knows, the Pope and the Vatican are in Italy. So when Trump criticizes Italy, it naturally upsets Italian voters and the Italian public. In this context, Meloni speaking up for the Pope makes sense. I think that's the background here. As for Europe, well, this reflects the current attitude of the European people. It's really quite the reversal. And why is that? Well, it's because of the attitude of European media and European politicians, which of course also includes European pride. Europe has always felt that the US should respect them when doing things, that they are equals with America. In fact, they even think they're a bit more noble than you. If the US strikes Iran, for example, or acts without consulting Europe beforehand, Europe would feel offended. Also, they're really not used to Trump's way of handling things. He doesn't talk about grand principles, he just takes action to solve problems. But now, what Europe is actually doing is, after the Iran conflict, the clash between Europe and the US, and I'm not talking about other kinds of conflicts, but rather ideological ones, has become very obvious. They are completely in disagreement under these circumstances. We can see that if even Trump can't handle Italy, then the US really might withdraw from Northern Europe. So what does the conflict between Meloni and the Pope tell us? It tells us about the whole of Europe. or at least all of Europe except for Eastern Europe, is opposing Trump, which means that the US and Europe are truly going their separate ways. In addition, there is breaking news. Europe is drafting a plan to open the Strait of Hormuz without the involvement of the United States. When Trump heard this news, he responded by saying, "This is sad." He said, "By the way, we are opening the strait. Ships are already coming and going." What does he mean by that? He means, what are you even talking about? You're talking about a problem that won't even exist in the future. We're already solving this issue. Then Trump continued saying, "This just goes to show, how can you have a group of countries with this kind of attitude?" He said, "Look at Greenland. We should own Greenland to protect the world from the threats posed by Russia and the Chinese Communist Party." Oh, so really, it's quite interesting. This topic is truly fascinating. Peace is considered noble, right? Peace is noble and war is evil. Is that really the case? I completely disagree. In this world, the right policy is to punish evil and promote good. How do you punish evil? Do you use persuasion to punish evildoers? Right? So war can be just or unjust, and peace can also be just or unjust. It's absolutely not the case that simply not going to war is always right, or that not punishing evildoers is always right. That's not how it works. That's my view. Now, let me give another example. It's a small thing, but it really illustrates the point. Trump, let me talk about Trump. Yesterday on Truth Social, he directly said that Europe is in urgent need of energy, yet the UK refuses to develop the North Sea oil fields. He said this is one of the greatest oil fields in the world. It's simply a tragedy. Aberdeen should have been prosperous and thriving. Aberdeen is that city in the northeast of the UK, near the North Sea. That city, which develops the North Sea oil fields, should have been prosperous and thriving. But Norway, on the northern side of the North Sea oil field, keeps pumping oil and sells the extracted oil to the UK at twice the price, making a fortune. The UK actually has a better position in the North Sea than Norway. Yet the UK doesn't develop it. He said they should drill, baby, drill. Hurry up and extract the oil and stop messing around with those wind turbines. How can you tell this? Let me explain this comment to everyone. I think Trump really hit the nail on the head. What does he mean? He means that the UK would rather import oil from Norway at a high price, even though it's the same oil extracted from the North Sea. They still refuse to develop it themselves and instead invest in wind power, which is expensive, unreliable, and can't guarantee energy supply. These wind turbines force the British public to bear high energy prices. This is a typical example of green energy ideology. So how should we look at this issue? Actually, it's very simple. Why is the UK doing this? Why is it so absurd? It's because, for the sake of environmentalism and political correctness, they would rather voluntarily give up the North Sea oil fields. Of course, you might say most of the North Sea oil fields have already been exploited and it's very expensive, so it's just not cost effective. But these are all just excuses. That's not the real reason. The UK is giving up on developing the North Sea oil fields because of ideology. After all, if it's so dangerous out at sea, what's that called? If the development costs are so high, then why has Norway continued to do it? Why does Norway have a sovereign wealth fund of $1.5 trillion, all earned from the North Sea oil fields? The UK just can't do this. To put it bluntly, let me say something that everyone in mainland China understands. They'd rather have socialist grass than capitalist seedlings. You'd rather have this so-called environmentalist grass than, what do you call it, oil, the seedlings of the North Sea oil fields. That's what it means. This is what you call cultural communism manifested in the UK. It's actually quite similar to China's Cultural Revolution. Different tunes, same effect. The same genes are at work here. So when Trump says this to the UK, think about it. Isn't this a well-intentioned but harsh piece of advice? Isn't it a loyal warning? It's advice that's hard to hear. Because when Trump says this, he's not doing it for himself. If Trump were acting out of self-interest, he wouldn't remind any country to develop their own oil fields. Instead, he would say, don't do anything, come buy oil from us in America. We have light oil, heavy oil, shale oil is light oil, Venezuela has heavy oil, we have every kind of oil. You just need to buy from us, that's it. If you combine oil production from the United States and Venezuela, let me tell you, it would far surpass the Middle East and become the world's #1 oil-producing region by 100%. So, Trump didn't say that. Instead, Trump said, the North Sea oil fields have oil. Hurry up and develop them yourselves. Don't be foolish. Trump said this out of concern for the United Kingdom and Europe. So, you can see from this that when it comes to matters of common sense, Trump is completely out of sync with the UK. On issues like the Pope and Iran, Trump is also not on the same page as his ally Meloni. So you could say that Europe has pretty much turned its back on him entirely. So in this situation, what will the future relationship between the US and Europe look like? I think it fits a Chinese saying, those whose paths are different cannot make plans together. Unless, of course, there is a political reversal in Europe. But even in Italy, where things have already flipped, after the reversal, it's still the same. Well, in short, how should I put it? Let me just say, when it comes to Trump, the things he does are indeed very aggressive and not easy to digest. He also doesn't really bother to explain things in detail. But the key point is everyone is an adult. It's not that they can't understand what's going on.